You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Removing impediments, obstacles, and blockers is one of the most visible and valuable ways a project manager supports a team. An impediment can be defined as anything that slows progress, reduces quality, or makes work unnecessarily difficult. A blocker is a more severe form, something that completely stops work until it is addressed. These differ from risks, which are potential future events, and from issues, which are realized problems already logged. The outcomes of effective impediment removal include smoother and more predictable delivery, higher team morale, and fewer wasteful workarounds. On the PMP exam, STEMs often disguise impediments as access delays, unclear decisions, or unresolved dependencies. The project manager's stance in this task is not to act as a personal expediter running errands, but as a barrier remover and system fixer. While sometimes it may involve chasing a signature or resolving a scheduling conflict, the deeper responsibility is to identify systemic patterns and fix the underlying process. For example, if recurring blockers involve slow approvals, the project manager's role is to improve the approval pathway, not just chase individual requests. On the exam, correct answers often emphasize systemic solutions, while distractors show the project manager handling symptoms in isolation. Impediments often appear subtly in exam scenarios, disguised in narratives about teams waiting for access, decisions, or vendor handoffs. Candidates must learn to recognize these as signals of blocked flow. Access to tools, environments, or data. Unresolved decisions from sponsors or bottlenecks in vendor delivery all qualify as impediments. Recognizing them requires attentiveness and structured visibility. Without this awareness, teams default to workarounds, which erode quality and create hidden risks. The PMP exam often rewards answers where the project manager surfaces impediments early and addresses them transparently, rather than tolerating slowdowns or masking them with extra effort. Visibility begins with capture. Maintaining an impediment log is the foundation, where each entry records the blocker, its cause, the owner responsible for resolution, and the date it was raised. This ensures accountability and prevents issues from disappearing into vague conversations. Visualization is equally important. Teams should see blockers represented on task boards or reports, where they can be prioritized by impact. Prioritization is critical because not all impediments require the same urgency. Some are local and temporary, while others are systemic and chronic. The PMP exam often includes questions about how to prioritize, rewarding answers that link urgency to delivery impact. Distinguishing types of impediments prevents wasted energy. Local impediments may involve a single task or team member, such as a missing tool license. Systemic impediments affect multiple teams or persist across iterations, such as recurring delays in procurement approvals. Urgent impediments demand immediate attention, while chronic impediments may require policy changes or structural fixes. By classifying blockers this way, project managers can respond proportionally. Another best practice is linking impediments to assumptions and risks, preserving context and ensuring future reviews capture lessons learned. On the exam, this linkage often appears in subtle hints. Look for clues about assumptions or chronic patterns. Root cause analysis prevents project managers from chasing symptoms. Tools like the 5 whys or fishbone diagrams are simple but effective for understanding why an impediment persists. For example, if testing is delayed, the cause might not be the testers themselves but an approval process that restricts access to environments. Once the cause is known, options can be generated: policy adjustments, negotiation with stakeholders, escalation through governance, or a temporary workaround. Evaluating each option means weighing its impact, cost, and risk. On the exam, correct answers generally emphasize root cause analysis before action, reflecting PMI's philosophy of analyze before act. Generating options also allows the project manager to balance temporary fixes with permanent solutions. For example, a temporary workaround might keep the team moving, while a longer-term negotiation addresses the root cause. Documenting which solutions are temporary and which are intended as permanent ensures clarity. It also sets expectations with stakeholders and avoids creating accidental long-term dependencies on unsustainable workarounds. On the PMP exam, distractor answers often involve quick fixes that ignore sustainability. The better answers distinguish between short-term relief and structural correction, reflecting disciplined leadership. Execution and follow-through ensure that impediment removal is not just a one-time action but a managed process. Time-boxing experiments is one method. Implement a fix for a defined period, verify outcomes, and adjust if needed. Communicating status transparently keeps the team informed and builds trust. Updating artifacts such as the issue log, risk register, or change log ensures decisions are traceable. Capturing lessons learned builds resilience by preparing the team for similar impediments in the future. On the exam, correct answers emphasize these disciplined practices rather than ad hoc fixes, showing that impediment management is structured, not improvised. Communication is critical during execution. Teams need to know that impediments are visible, being addressed, and tracked to closure. Regular updates reassure them that progress is real, even if resolution takes time. Transparency also prevents rumors and frustration. For example, if a blocker requires a lengthy approval, informing the team of expected timelines helps them plan around it. The PMP exam often embeds scenarios where communication makes the difference between trust and erosion of morale. The correct answer usually highlights keeping both the team and stakeholders informed during impediment resolution. Updating artifacts is a step often overlooked in practice but highlighted on the exam. When impediments are removed, related logs and registers must be updated to reflect changes. For example, resolving a dependency on a vendor may require updating the risk register if residual risks remain. If a policy change alters process flow, the change log should capture it for auditability. Documenting these updates ensures governance bodies have accurate information and prevents the team from revisiting already solved issues. On the exam, expect correct answers to emphasize artifact updates alongside resolution. Escalation is sometimes necessary but must be handled with integrity. Escalating too early undermines the team's autonomy, while escalating too late delays progress. The principle is to escalate only after analyzing the impact, exploring options, and documenting evidence. This ensures escalation is purposeful, not reactive. On the PMP exam, distractor answers often involve escalating immediately, while correct answers emphasize attempting resolution first, then escalating with analysis in hand. Escalation is not about shifting blame, but about ensuring that systemic barriers are addressed by those with the authority to act. When escalation is required, using governance paths is essential. For example, systemic resource shortages may be raised to a steering committee, or policy barriers escalated to compliance leaders. Avoiding noise escalations, raising minor issues without context, preserves credibility. Tracking response times and outcomes from escalations provides feedback to improve governance systems. On the exam, correct answers usually show the project manager following formal governance channels rather than improvising or bypassing structures. PMI emphasizes respecting governance as part of professional practice. Acknowledging stakeholders who help unblock issues is an often overlooked but valuable step. Thanking individuals or groups who assist in removing impediments reinforces positive behavior and builds goodwill for future collaboration. Recognition creates allies in the system and encourages stakeholders to continue supporting the project. On the exam, answers that highlight stakeholder engagement and reinforcement often reflect PMI's philosophy of relationship management. Effective project managers not only resolve impediments, but also cultivate environments where others are motivated to help unblock work proactively. In conclusion, removing impediments is about sustaining flow, protecting morale, and reinforcing accountability. The project manager acts as both barrier remover and system architect, ensuring blockers are visible, analyzed, addressed, and documented. Escalation happens last and always with evidence and options in hand. Artifacts such as logs and registers provide transparency, while communication keeps trust intact. On the PMP exam, answers that emphasize analysis, structure, and governance typically represent best practice. Impediment removal is not just reactive, it is an ongoing discipline that transforms obstacles into opportunities for continuous improvement. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Agile and predictive approaches surface impediments differently, but the intent remains the same. Keep flow moving. In agile environments, blockers are raised in the daily stand-up, where each team member notes progress and impediments. The Scrum Master or Project Manager facilitates their removal, often within the same day. Predictive environments rely more on formal structures. Blockages may be entered into issue logs and resolved through escalation paths or formal change requests when systemic fixes are needed. Hybrid environments must blend the two, allowing impediments to surface quickly in cadence events while also respecting governance timelines. On the exam, correct answers emphasize using the approach that fits the delivery mode while maintaining visibility. Artifacts must remain consistent with the delivery mode. In Agile, backlog policies and definitions of done provide clarity on what constitutes blocked work. Predictive projects lean on baselines and change control logs. Hybrid approaches require aligning fixes across both sets of artifacts. For example, a chronic approval delay might be addressed in a sprint retrospective while simultaneously logged in a formal issue register for governance review. The PMP exam often embeds hints about context terms like daily stand-up or change request point to the delivery style. The best answers connect impediment removal to the right artifact for that style. External dependencies are a common source of impediments, particularly when vendors or partners are involved. Service-level expectations should be defined clearly in contracts, with explicit handoffs and timelines. Without clarity, delays and finger-pointing emerge. When impediments occur, evidence must be gathered before escalation, showing missed service levels or incomplete handoffs. Negotiating solutions with vendors requires balancing relationship management with contract enforcement. For chronic blockers, buffering strategies such as building slack into schedules or developing parallel work streams may be necessary. On the exam, correct answers emphasize proactive negotiation and contract clarity rather than passive waiting. Vendor contracts themselves may need to be adjusted if impediments recur. For example, if a supplier consistently fails to deliver components on time, the project manager may work with procurement to update terms, add penalties, or redefine delivery milestones. Chronic blockers must be addressed structurally, otherwise they continue draining performance. Exam questions often disguise these issues by describing repeated vendor delays. The best response is usually to involve procurement and revisit contractual terms, not simply to accept ongoing disruption. PMI emphasizes using governance tools to fix systemic problems rather than tolerating repeated workarounds. Buffering strategies are sometimes necessary when external impediments cannot be eliminated immediately. Parallel work, adjusted sequencing, or temporary workarounds allow teams to make progress while waiting for resolution. However, buffers must be used judiciously. Too much slack reduces efficiency, while too little creates brittle schedules. Documenting buffer decisions in artifacts ensures transparency and accountability. On the exam, answers that recognize buffering as an interim strategy combined with systemic fixes usually reflect PMI's philosophy of pragmatism balanced with discipline. Consider a scenario where a team is blocked by lack of access to production data. Security has delayed approvals, leaving the team idle. Options might include bypassing policy to access data directly, escalating immediately to the CIO, proposing a sanitized dataset while fast-tracking a policy update, or waiting it out. The best next action is to propose a compliant alternative such as sanitized data, paired with a policy fix so work continues without breaching governance. On the exam, distractors often involve bypassing compliance or waiting idly, correct answers blend pragmatism with adherence to rules. In predictive contexts, the same scenario would involve more formal steps. A request for exception or policy change would be submitted through governance channels, while an interim workaround, like test data, keeps progress alive. This dual-path formal change plus practical mitigation illustrates PMI's expectation that project managers balance compliance with delivery. On the exam, scenarios often present compliance-heavy environments, and the correct answer is never to bypass rules. Instead, PMI rewards candidates who propose compliant alternatives while pursuing systemic fixes through governance. Exam pitfalls in this task often involve rushing to escalation without analysis or presenting options. Escalating first undermines credibility, while bringing analysis and alternatives strengthens trust. Another pitfall is accepting workarounds that violate compliance, such as unauthorized data access. Hiding chronic blockers is equally damaging. Without visibility, governance cannot fix systemic problems. Finally, treating symptoms rather than causes like scheduling extra meetings instead of addressing policy or tooling issues creates wasted effort. On the PMP exam, distractors often reflect these pitfalls, and the best answers avoid them by emphasizing analysis, compliance, and visibility. Workarounds that break compliance are particularly dangerous. While they may appear to unblock the team quickly, they expose the organization to risk and liability. PMI stresses that compliance cannot be sacrificed for speed. On the exam, any answer suggesting a compliance breach is automatically wrong. Similarly, ignoring chronic blockers or keeping them hidden violates transparency and governance principles. Correct answers usually emphasize making blockers visible in logs, analyzing root causes, and escalating through proper channels when necessary. This reinforces PMI's emphasis on professionalism and integrity in project leadership. Symptoms versus causes is another common trap. For example, adding more meetings may seem to address slow decision-making, but if the true cause is lack of decision rights or unclear governance, the meetings will not fix the problem. Treating root causes requires asking why the impediment exists and addressing the systemic issue. On the exam, correct answers typically involve root cause analysis before prescribing action. PMI discourages surface-level fixes, rewarding candidates who demonstrate structured, thoughtful approaches to problem-solving. A quick playbook for removing impediments helps consolidate best practice. Step 1. Log and visualize impediments, ensuring transparency. Step 2. Analyze causes using tools like 5 whys or fishbone diagrams. Step 3. Evaluate options and pick the least disruptive, compliant fix. Step 4. Communicate status, verify outcomes, and update artifacts such as issue logs or change registers. Step 5. Escalate only when necessary, armed with evidence and proposed options. This cycle protects delivery flow while maintaining accountability. On the exam, answers that mirror this playbook usually reflect PMI's philosophy of structured, transparent leadership. Communication is embedded in every step of this playbook. Teams must know impediments are acknowledged and tracked, while stakeholders require updates on progress and resolution. Transparency creates trust even when resolution takes time. Communicating lessons learned also prevents future impediments, strengthening organizational maturity. On the PMP exam, scenarios often test whether communication accompanies action. The correct answer typically includes both fixing the problem and keeping the team informed. In conclusion, removing impediments is about protecting flow, morale, and accountability. Project managers act as barrier removers and system architects, ensuring blockers are visible, analyzed, addressed, and, when necessary, escalated with integrity. Agile, predictive, and hybrid approaches each offer different practices, but the underlying principles remain consistent: transparency, compliance, root cause analysis, and structured governance. On the exam, The best answers typically reject shortcuts in favor of evidence-based systemic fixes. Effective impediment removal turns obstacles into opportunities to strengthen processes, relationships, and long-term delivery capability. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.